Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nugentino Cinema. I'm joined today by Rikki for the first time. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks, Drew.
I just want to introduce yourself to the listeners. I think you're a longtime Film Junk fan. That's how we got to know each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably a little bit more active on some of the film junk communities in the last year, but I've been listening to film junk for probably about since 2016. Yeah,
Oh,
so
nice.
similar tastes, I think.
Yeah, how did you originally come to find Film Junk?
It was actually a friend in New Zealand who was I think listening to the show back, maybe not quite back as far as you, but pretty far. But I was
Mhm.
listening to some other podcasts like How Did This Get Made and what's the other one, The Flophouse, and he suggested Film Junk and started listening and hit the back catalog and got hooked.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good show, and yeah, I think you told me your friend's name, and I think I've heard of him from. He might have written in at
Yeah,
some point back in the day.
yeah, one Costrada, I believe,
Yeah, sounds like a familiar
and in the
name.
older episodes you do hear a few of his questions being read out.
And you're from New Zealand, of course, so we were separated by 16 hours.
Yeah, and which can even working that out can be difficult with daylight savings here as well. So I
Mhm.
think I think last time we got it wrong by an hour because depending on where on the internet you go to see what the time difference is, you can get varying different reports.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I guess it's Sunday your time.
Yep, it's just about noon here on Sunday, so
Yeah.
slightly living in the future.
This, yeah, and here it's Saturday at six something, 6:30 something. Um, but yeah, thanks for joining me. And today we're here to review The Empty Man, which I think so. This is like a favorite, well, like a personal favorite of yours or guilty pleasure.
I wouldn't even say guilty pleasure, but it's I think last
Yeah.
when I recently did my top 100 movies, I included Empty Man. Not near the top, but it's there. It's there for a
Mhm.
reason.
Yeah. How did you first see this movie, or was it just around when it came out?
Now this is that this was 2020, which was the most COVIDy of COVID years,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the things that I'll really remember it for. There's these certain bits of pop culture that were just very COVID. Like Tiger King was the very first like popular piece of like lockdown culture that everybody was watching, and things like Bo Burnham's Inside that just make me really think of that
Yeah.
that first year. And like being stuck at home, and we had lots of rounds of lockdowns in New Zealand, as I'm sure probably happened in different parts of the states. But watched a lot of movies, and often because my wife and I like horrors and thrillers, getting regularly going on Google and going like top horrors and thrillers 2020, and Empty Man came up, and the um the the sort of critic consensus at the time, I think it was very split and towards negative. I think maybe the Rotten Tomatoes meter might have been even below 50, and I think it's actually I think it's actually been reappraised a bit, and it might be more like 70% now. But we just checked it out because it was supposed to be good. There was a bit of talk about how it actually had a decent sized budget, but I think it got dropped because it was maybe a Fox production, and then there was a change of management, maybe with a Disney thing, and people didn't really know how do we market this movie, and it did actually get a theatrical release, but very limited, so it was a
Mm.
complete financial flop. And then it sort of I think it made it to streaming on iTunes quite quickly, which is where I purchased it in glorious 4K, and I think it's on Disney Plus or Hulu now. So that's where we came across it. We watched pretty much any new horror and thriller of note, which is something that we continue doing.
Nice. Yeah, I think I bought it a couple of years ago on Vudu for about like $4 in
Yeah,
4K. So
yeah.
like ridiculously cheap price to own it on 4K, well, digital 4K. But
And the value when you think about the runtime, like $4. If you look at it per minute, that's a really good value.
yeah, it's crazy good value. But yeah, so to give some background to the movie, like I think It's directed by David Pryor, who I think he was actually he like directed some of the documentaries, like making of documentaries for David Fincher's films, and I think you can see for sure a David Fincher influence on the movie. It kind of
Yeah.
feels like a combination of David Fincher and Richard Kelly, director of Donnie Darko, to me.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of influences, and I should probably mention that these are always spoiler reviews you do, aren't they? And I'd
Mm-hmm.
probably urge anyone like listening, watching to this to give it a go, especially if it's on streaming before you listen to this, because the story is quite confounding and surprising, and it's probably maybe best going into it a bit blind. But there are a number of influences to the point where it can seem possibly derivative. Um, there's that very much the Fincher lens. It's sort of directed very confidently
Mm-hmm.
for someone's first feature, and there's all these aspects of things like the creepy pasta type supernatural procedural aspect, and I think there's aspects of things like what's that movie, the Ben Wheatley movie Kill List. I think
Yeah,
there's some aspects that people are say quite derivative of that.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a cultish element that comes in later, and at first it kind of seems to be like almost like a Scientology, like a weird sort of religion, but then it sort of devolves, or not devolves, but just goes into something more like classic, like people surrounding like a bonfire and stuff like that, and like hooded figures chasing him. Um, but I thought it was interesting the direction the movie goes. I guess I should start from the beginning. Um, so it starts with a pretty epic cold open, no pun intended, because they are
Yeah,
in the snow, in the
in
mountains.
Bhutan, I believe. Yeah,
Yeah, and that's a really good sequence, the opening sequence. I think it honestly might be the best part of the movie. Well, I mean, I like the whole movie, but I just think that's a standout sequence for sure.
there are quite a few people online that don't like the movie, but really like that first 20 minutes, which is almost independent of the rest of the movie. There is a connection there, but it's almost like, what is the Coen Brothers movie? Is it A Serious Man or something like that, which starts
Yeah,
with a self-contained story that has thematic connections, but is otherwise quite separately removed.
yeah, yeah, very much. I can definitely see that. It's really just there to set up the empty man, but they go into you know a whole extended like 25-minute sequence that's other than just connecting the two things is definitely kind of separate, but and the rest of the movie has a different vibe. I mean, it's still they're both like horror vibes, but this first sequence is out high in the mountains, and the rest of it is just sort of a you know thriller with a guy sort of like looking into a case, sort of a kind of a detective vibe in a way, even though he's not actually a detective. Um, but James Badgedale, who plays the main character, I haven't seen him in much. As a name I've heard, but I think he was good. Not that he was like fantastic, but I thought he was good. Like he definitely carried the movie.
Yeah, and I think it's also by the end, once it's revealed the nature of the empty man and what's happening, there's something about his sort of villain, vanilla, sort of blank, generic hero thing that sort of makes sense. I thought he was
Mm-hmm.
really good, and I don't think I've seen him in much. I think he may have been the lead in, is it the TV show Rubicon? One
Mm-hmm.
one of those, or Person of Interest, one of those ones that I've heard good things about. But I think he's maybe a leading man in a TV show, and this was maybe an attempt to make him a leading man on
Yeah,
the silver screen.
yeah. I think he's good in it, but it's interesting. Like I mean, it's like the way that not that this movie was marketed heavily or anything, and it came out during COVID, but I feel like if it was marketed, the main thing that people would have been thinking when they see trailers or whatever is that this is sort of a traditional, like not traditional, but just like the type of horror movie that you might see alongside like the Boogeyman
Yeah,
or some of these like trashy like Blumhouse things. But but it's something. I mean, it's like 2 hours and 20 minutes long. It's a pretty
mhm.
epic movie, and I definitely it's sort of even though David Pryor hasn't done anything else other than this, other than some documentaries. um, I see it as almost like the style of it is almost like a tourist, like
Yeah,
something that's sort of, it feels like he's trying to make like elevated horror for sure.
yeah, absolutely. I think there's a real ambition, and there's a sort
Hmm.
of an epicness of it, and probably at times maybe the budget doesn't quite rise to the occasion. I think even in Bhutan, there's a few bits that look very greeny, but I
Hmm.
think I like it when somebody really swings in a big way, even if it doesn't completely connect. And I feel like there's three real sections to the movie. The first one, you've kind of got that self-contained, I don't know, cabin fever type. I don't know what movie to compare it to, or even a little bit of Evil Dead. And then you got that second middle chapter, which is the supernatural, urban legend, police procedural type thing. I think that's probably where the marketing was on, and that was maybe what lend it to be connected to like the likes of Slender Man type things, especially with the name being quite similar. And then third, you've got this cult conspiracy, um, what Lovecraftian cosmic horror
Yeah.
sort of going on, and
Hmm.
I think the second part is probably similar to what was marketed. I think it's the rug pull of the first and third acts, and the fact that some people would probably see the culmination of the movie of almost making the middle chapter seeming like a bit of a trick and a rug
Hmm.
pull. And did any of that happen? And if so, how much of it did?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I think I had heard about it because I think originally when I first heard about the movie, I wasn't interested at all because I just sort of lumped it in with other horror movies that I wasn't really interested in. But the more I heard about it, the more I became more interested in it. So once I actually sat down to watch the movie, I was sort of prepared. But yeah, I can't like. It would be interesting to think what somebody who just goes into this movie completely blind would think, or
Yeah,
just
which was
prepared for like a typical horror movie, what they would think. But yeah.
yeah. And I think the first time I watched it, and I gave it that 5 on Letterbox, I think a lot of it was just a really good type of confusion. I think I used the word confounded, just just that kind of whole like what the heck thing, and was that a complete cheat? And I don't know. Have you rewatched it at all?
Yeah, I watched it a few years ago, and then I watched it last week.
Oh, yeah, you did.
Um,
Yep.
mhm, yeah, and I thought about rewatching it last night, but I couldn't fully pull the trigger on that. But I did watch it recently, like
I
last
think
week.
I think last week is fresh enough, and that's when I did it as well. How did you find the rewatch compared to the original watch?
I liked it better the second time. I mean, well, it's sort of
Uh-huh.
similar ratings. I gave it a 3.5 the first time, and I think I still give it a 3.5 now. But I can see that going up. It's definitely a movie I would rewatch in the future. It's something that kind of grows. Um, I thought the second time I was more able to. I find this with a lot of movies, but I was more able to just absorb it and take it in better
Yep.
and understand things better. Um, but yeah, I enjoy the movie. I feel like it gets complicated towards the end, but that
Yeah.
only makes it easier to come back to, for me at least, because I do find it an enjoyable watch.
Yeah. I probably liked it more on a rewatch, and I was wondering, seeing that you originally logged it with 3.5, I wondered whether it would go up or down, because sometimes you enjoy a movie more if you understand what the movie actually is,
Yeah,
and you know what you're in for, and you don't feel as disappointed or tricked.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So,
Yeah,
maybe it's a heavy 3.5 this time for you.
no, definitely heavy 3.5 because I think it
Good.
leans towards 4 a little bit, but for some reason 3.5 just feels more where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's a cool movie, especially to come from somebody who hasn't like really directed much before. It's a very confident movie with like a very assured style, and it feels like something from somebody who's been like experienced for years. And I guess he
Yeah.
is somewhat experienced because he worked on these David Fincher documentaries, and I'm sure
Yeah.
that he's been around a lot of very you know professional, very talented people. Um,
Yeah, I feel
so
like he might have done some like assistant director, unit director type stuff. So I think he's maybe quite experienced and technically proficient, and
yeah,
this
for
was just the
sure.
first time he got to take that
Mm.
opportunity.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to see what his second movie would be like. I don't know how that would go because I know
Oh,
this movie wasn't very successful, but hopefully something happens.
I feel like with the whole there's a lot of financial flops in the COVID era, and I feel like this has been reappraised, and I think it's sort of agreed that it is interesting, that it has earned cult status, and I think it has had a second life
Mhm.
on streaming. I think if there was a physical media release on 4K or something, I think it would, with a boutique label, I think it would do quite well. But I don't know if you know, but you haven't seen Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities series, have you?
I've seen one episode. I only saw the
Yep.
episode that was done by Panos Cosmatos of Mandy.
Yeah,
I just watched
yeah.
that one because I like him, but I didn't
That
watch any of the other ones.
and that's very much his style, right?
Mhm,
So this one called The Autopsy, which
mhm.
is almost movie length, which is by David Pryor.
Okay, yeah, that's
And
cool.
I think it might start F. Murray Abraham. I think it does. But it's really good. And I think you'd if you watched it not knowing it, I think you'd the style is very similar, and I think it has some more of that cosmic horror sort of Lovecraftian sort of aspect. So the Autopsy, give that one a go. I sort of like his second work. It
Yeah, I
stands
definitely
well
need
with
to
me.
check that out. Yeah, that sounds cool. Yeah, that Cabinet of Curiosities was an interesting thing because I like that all of those episodes are sort of separate. It's a Twilight
Yeah,
Zone kind of thing, but they're all like sort of around feature length. It is pretty cool
yeah.
for sure.
No, interesting stuff. The set pieces in this movie, I think, watching it again and just looking forward to certain parts coming up, I think of the part you're talking about in the scene in the cave with that sort of a space jockey from Alien sort of
Yeah,
scene, which was from a 3D printed creation and looks. I think he asked the production people to make it look very like ancient and evil or something like that.
yeah,
And then there's the scene on the bridge with the teenagers. I think is a very effective set piece. And then you've got that whole double whammy of the cabin and him watching those VHSs and some of the weird content in that immediately followed by the bonfire, which I think is a amazing set piece. I I loved it the first time, and I was just looking forward to that on the second watch. The way that that all of those people are just spiraling, the way when they see him, and then he does a couple of subtle movements, and they kind of mirror that. And then he just sort of has this reaction. I can't remember exactly what he says, but it reminded me of a scene in Nope where the character's just sitting in the car and he's just like, nope, 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 and
oh yeah,
he's
I think I
he's like,
laughed at that. Like when that happened in the movie, it is very similar to the Nope scene for sure.
it's basically like, oh screw this type of thing. He just
Yeah,
runs.
yeah, yeah. That's
There's
a really
this
good
sort of
scene.
children of menish sort of escape. I think he's even reversing this car for quite a while as well.
Mhm. Yeah,
But that's
I
the sort
thought
of thing
that.
you don't normally get, do you? Like something like a scene with that much kind of ambition.
Yeah, for sure, and yeah, he executes it very well. I can definitely see it compared to Kill List, which is a similar kind of thing. Also done well. This is a different vibe to it. But one thing I was gonna say is I feel like the daughter was good. Like she was very good at being creepy, which is what she was supposed to be. Um,
That's the daughter of his lady friend.
yeah, the one that ultimately like
Yeah,
created him, like at the
yeah.
end.
It's very strange, right? Because if you had to actually, now that you've seen it twice, if you had to write down the exact mechanics of the plot,
Mhm.
what
I wouldn't be
level
able
of
to fully do
accuracy?
it, but
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I find it weird because I still don't understand why she. I mean, I know that she's a part of this cult and like they're interested in tulpas.
yeah.
But I don't understand like why she wanted him to be with her mom. It's very strange. Because she says that I wrote down like everything that's ever happened to you, and
Yeah.
it starts from him being in the restaurant at the very beginning. So that's basically the beginning of his life is the
His
him
his
at the
his
restaurant.
birthday, his literal birthday. Yeah.
Yeah, and so from there, everything that happens to him is something that she's written out exactly. And I'm not quite sure of like the motivation of that. I guess I mean maybe that's like maybe it's obvious. I'm just missing it, but Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that aspect, but I guess if she writes her mum into it, then that gives her an excuse to to close proximity to him, so that
Mhm.
there's a reason for her to have a connection and be able to influence him or monitor him because she's the daughter of his mistress or in the past.
But it felt weird because it was like she's like it feels like she has a history with him, like because she goes to him for help so that he can like go look for her for the daughter.
Yeah,
And it feels like she knows him, but he's only existed for like a few days. So
yeah. It's well, and that's the thing where I thought like you watch movies like Sixth Sense, you rewatch it,
mm,
and you there's this whole aspect of like how do I not notice that, and that's what that means. And this doesn't really have that because even pinpointing again the mechanics, so we could say, oh, he starts on that day in the restaurant, but there's all this attached stuff that of course doesn't make sense because the home he's been living in is just an abandoned home, and he's got all these interactions with these police officers that seem to have some history with him that
mm,
appear to be part of the fiction, but I couldn't confidently actually say what was real and what wasn't because some of it just does not make sense. Like
yeah.
those cops would not be dealing with him that way if he had just been procured out of out of thin air 2 days ago.
Well, I think that he is physically real. Like it's not like he's like
He
a
is.
ghost. Like he's
Yeah,
actually real, but he's. I think that's a part of what a tulpa is. It's like they believe they can manifest out of their mind
yeah,
an actual person, which is insane. But it's a real theory that's out there. Like you can, there's like a Wikipedia article I've read about it and stuff. But I don't know. It's a very weird concept. It's actually covered in Twin Peaks: The Return a little bit. There's some
yeah.
tulpa stuff that goes
Heard
on in
that.
that.
Well, and
Um,
I think it's an interesting concept, and it is actually quite like creepy in a way. This whole time and concentration. Then they eventually, and I think that thing that they see on the VHS is an example of an early attempt at the Tulpa where they hadn't done enough around
mhm,
concentrating on its backstory and story, so it seemed to come out as some kind of mindless demon. That's the impression I sort of got. So this was their attempt where they're like, right, we're gonna really pick who this guy is and who's in his life. So
mhm.
he will sort of maybe like that whole first attempt at the Matrix simulation where it didn't work
Yeah,
because people just didn't accept it. So he needed that story. He uses that phrase, "I'm from San Francisco." The first time he says it, um, it makes sense because they're talking about some weird people or something, and it's like some joke about maybe like eccentric people in San Francisco, and then he uses it about two or three other times, and often drops it in when
yeah,
there's no context to it all.
yeah. It kind of reminds me of Blade Runner and his like implanted memories or the whole thing in Blade Runner where he's not sure whether he's a replicant or not.
Yeah,
Um, that's just something I kind of thought of. I mean, the main thing being the implanted memories. Um, because at the end, the daughter comes is like saying like just kind of because his whole core thing is like his memories of his family dying, and then she's just like I implanted that. That is something that I wrote for you. Um, but it's an interesting concept for sure.
yeah. You know, after my first watch, I kind of like really stuck with that. There was that scene at the Pontifex Institute, I think, and there's that really great single scene with Stephen Root and his speech, which I think is really great. And then he sneaks in and he observes that, and then towards the end, there's a bit of a flashback suggesting that he was almost observing his own creation, and that the person that was coming out was him,
Mhm.
which doesn't, which if you treat everything chronologically, it doesn't make sense
Yeah,
if the restaurant was his birth. And again, I think that I don't see that as plot holes at all. And maybe this is just me force feeding this movie, but again, that confounding, confusing nature and never really being able to completely grapple it, the unreliable narrator aspect, and he's not deliberately unreliable. He's put in a position where he can't be reliable because he doesn't know what's happening. I think that's one of the things that makes it rewatchable for me.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it sort of has like a weird like noir kind of element to it. I mean, the fact that he's sort of investigating something always helps it have that noir feeling. But a lot of
Yep.
these kind of noirs where it's somebody investigating, they're sort of sprawling and confusing and long, and this movie covers all of those bases. But yeah, I compared it to Blade Runner, which is also another
Yeah.
sort of neo noir. But it's an interesting combination to have that, because I can't think of too many like neo noir type movies that are also combined with like horror.
Yep.
So I think it's a pretty cool combination.
So how do you find the ending? Do you think the ending, I guess, builds on the movie, or do you think it somewhat undoes it once it explains what's happening and where it ends?
I like the ending. I mean, I don't. There's still all the pieces I need to figure out, or like, because like you were saying, I think it's intentional. I just don't fully understand it. But I don't think it's like a mistake. Um, because it's too strange and it just feels the way it's written like it has to be intentional. But I like the ending. It sort of gave me like a hereditary vibe. The
Hmm.
way like all these hospital people are like kneeling to him and stuff. It reminded me of the last scene in
Yeah.
Hereditary in the attic with all the, you know, people worshiping Payman.
Yeah.
But but it had that same sort of unsettling vibe to me.
Yeah. And I one of the things I really liked on the rewatch is when there is a he kills somebody at the end, and I like how in another movie it would have just been like a single headshot.
Yeah,
He puts in about four shots and completely destroys this person's head, which
yeah,
is completely uncalled for in the context of it. But it's just like one of those things where the movie just kind of goes for broke a bit, and just occasionally when there is violence, it's just more disgusting than it needs to be.
yeah. Yeah, there's not. I'm trying to think. There's not like too much violence, but whenever there is violence, it's pretty strong. But it's few and far between. So they pick their moments.
Yeah, how do you find in terms of the effectiveness of that middle chapter where it goes more into like Candyman and those sorts of things, and you've got or Ringu, where you do something and then you over the course of a couple of days things escalate, and
Mhm.
before you're killed, and there was a particular um, set piece in a sauna or a health spa. I don't know exactly where she is, but that's
Oh yeah,
probably the most overtly horror slasherish scene.
yeah. That is probably the most like sort of classic horror scene. But I like that scene. Yeah. Um, that's probably one of the big major like violent moments. Um, but yeah, I don't have too many. I mean, I feel like I should bump up my star rating because really I don't have that many complaints. It's more just like some of the confusion that happens, but that's not. I mean, it's sort of just the style of the movie. So yeah,
I think it's one of those ones where I'm sort of re-listening to all the Film Junk episodes, and I'm about to hit the COVID era, which is really interesting. They've just got the soundboard, and today I was listening to the one where Jay reappraised Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it immediately jumped up from a 3.5 to a 5,
yeah,
and it was just again suddenly expectations of what it is completely falls away, and then you spend more time finding reasons to enjoy what is up there and
hmm
celebrate its uniqueness rather than looking at some of the things that are potentially flaws and going, well, these are features, these are things that are different. The the weird the weirdness of the way it changes kind of what movie it is, what genre it is. I don't know, like maybe sort of like Doomsday, right? Like how it kind of like it's a single story, but it's kind of like a Escape from New York pastiche, and then it's a Mad Max sort of movie.
yeah,
It becomes endearing because how many movies do that?
yeah. I definitely agree. I like movies that are sort of genre benders and genre mashups. Um, this is a strange example, but I like Pineapple Express because
Mm.
it's like sort of comedy, like a very strong like stoner comedy, but it also mixes that with like sort of an action film. But I find that like there's multiple comedies that sort of add like an action element, but it
Yep.
seems very whenever a lot of other movies do it, it just seems like rote, like they're just like doing it just to make it more entertaining, but it's like really poorly done. But in Pineapple Express, like it feels like it takes the best parts of like an action
Yep.
comedy and like understands like the genre more. and does both parts really well. And I think this is similar. Like it's doing horror well, and it's doing neo noir well. Everything it's doing at a good level.
I think
So
Pineapple Express is a movie I've seen twice and saw it around when it first came out, and it was okay, but probably a bit disappointed. And then the second watch, I absolutely loved it. And I
yeah,
think again, just knowing what it is and where that turn's going to happen, I think Pineapple Express, the way it sort of pivots into a violent action movie, I actually like it better than what Hot Fuzz does.
yeah, I agree.
Similar.
Well, I haven't seen Hot Fuzz in a long time. I think I gave it like a 5 when I first saw it, and
Mhm.
that was like 10 years ago. But I'd have to rewatch it because I loved it at the time, but for some reason it feels like lower in my mind now. Like I would say I like Pineapple Express more, but I'd have to rewatch
Yeah.
it though. Yeah,
But another one, a movie that you and I both enjoy, Observe and Report.
yeah,
I didn't like it much on the first
mhm.
watch. It was okay. I blind bought it on Blu-ray in a bargain bin, lots of bees. And it was when a friend who was visiting from overseas, like, just wanted to watch it, and it was a great time watching it. And again, knowing what it is and what beats it's going to hit, um, you, you it just becomes a thing of beauty rather than
Yeah,
something that annoys you.
yeah, for sure. And that's another movie that combines genres in a cool way. I think. I mean, it's weird because with that, it's more of like, and you see this done more now with Joker and some other movies, but like it's sort of a taxi driver meets like more straightforward comedy, and I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and I think when you know the director's kind of personal style, and I think when I
Mhm.
watched it, I hadn't seen any of it. Is it Jody Hill, his output?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
now being a fan of Eastbound and Down, Vice Principals, Righteous Gemstones, like understanding his particular sense of humor, just makes me absolutely love Observe and Report now.
And actually, I mean, I think this would be good for the video, but just one second, I can cut this together. And there's like a
Thank you for
gap,
gold.
but like I'm just gonna pull something out of my closet here. So this is my Observe and Report poster. I bought this like in high school or something, and it's all beat up and like folded up now because I did not respect my posters back then. But yeah, I had a full size, like movie theater size Observe and Report poster, and I would still like to try to like get that framed or something. But
Awesome.
yeah, I was very highly into Observe and Report when it came out.
Yeah, and I sometimes I just realized that, like, yeah, that would have come out when you were um still school age, right? So
Yeah,
that
I
was
saw it.
probably quite
I think it
influential
was
for
the
you.
first. It was the first R-rated movie I ever saw in the theater. So I didn't. I wasn't even of legal age to see an R-rated movie. I just snuck into it. But I was 15. Um, yeah, I would have been 15, turning 16 that year. But I was 15 when I saw it, and yeah, that was a seminal movie for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah, but we kind of got diverted on Observe and Report, but we're reviewing The Empty Man. Sort
Yeah,
of a weird path,
where these
but
conversations go, right?
but it's sort of connected in that they're genre bending films in very different ways. Um, but yeah, I didn't have too many other thoughts on The Empty Man. Overall, it's like it's a really good experience watching it. I enjoy the movie. It's uh, it's 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 a nice memory in my mind of something that was a pleasant surprise because I really thought it was gonna be like a nothing movie when it first came out. It ended up being something pretty cool. Um, and yeah, I'll definitely it's a movie I'll definitely come back to.
Yeah, I think it's like there are so many movies that don't deliver and surprise you negatively by disappointing and thinking it looks really good, and this one is almost because of the poor marketing and the bad timing. Um, there's more there than you think you're going to get. And again, I think that's what turns some people off on it. And again, the length. Um, again, I just think there's ambition, there's clear um, technique. I think the the tone. There's a constantly menacing tone. I think there's just the thing that all parts of the movie have in common is there's a constant feeling of malevolence. Like it's very grim. The sound design, the sort of whispering sort of voices are unsettling. every scene is just filmed awesomely. There's that weird showy scene where it goes from looking at the map um,
Hmm.
to the cabin, and then it zooms in
Yeah,
into the forest and into the car, which I don't know, is that Fincheresque, or is that maybe might seem a bit more like a bad director sort of trying to do something Fincheresque? I'm not sure.
yeah.
What was your take on that? Do you remember that scene?
I like the scene specifically. Like I'm having trouble like parsing it out of my mind, but I feel like everything was executed like really well. I almost feel like this is a movie that like should be respected. Like I feel like if it came out under the label of A24, which I
Mm,
could almost see it coming out under that label, like it'd be a lot more respected in how well crafted it is. And some of those movies don't make much money, but they still like help the careers of those
yeah.
involved, and because they're respected from like an artistic point of view. But yeah, I feel like if this movie was kind of released that way, it might have helped
Mm,
it. Um,
maybe. And
yeah.
maybe it's the lack of reputation by the director, because I think about something more recent like Alex Garland's Men,
Mhm.
and I think there's some similar strengths and potential criticisms, but I think Men probably more popular in spite of some people not liking where it goes, just because there's maybe it's less surprising, sort of in the over of Alex Garland, and that
Mhm.
people maybe expect something a little bit different from it.
Yeah. Yeah, and this was kind of came out as like a studio movie, which is strange. Um, yeah, but I guess people have different expectations. But yeah, I mean, overall, I mean, I think it's a good movie for sure. So you would give
Yep,
it your rating is a 5?
another five.
Yeah.
Might have put a love heart against it, but it's sort of I was wondering whether putting it in my top 100 was going to be a little bit too hasty, and that I might eat my words, but I liked it just as much, if not more, the second time, and it's definitely a favorite.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I can definitely see it being like a favorite. It's a unique movie for sure. And yeah, I'm glad I've seen it. I'm glad it's in my digital collection at least.
And by the way, like I'll say that it was a revelatory rewatch, because it was the first time wasn't on an OLED TV, but
Mhm.
all those very black scenes, and with bright spots in them, I think just looked amazing, and it just
Yeah.
a renewed appreciation for the quality of the directing, just how it's very big screen. It's at times almost got like an IMAXy feel to it, um,
Yeah, that's cool.
but strong technical direction, I think, goes a long way with a movie like that. And I just think about so many of the recent horror movies I've watched. I think the last one was There's Something Wrong with the Children, um,
Mhm.
and there's it looks like Empty Man looks like a movie. It looks like something to be seen
For
on a
sure.
big screen,
Yeah.
whereas a lot of what comes out is very televisual. Of course,
Yeah.
is the word.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a lot of stuff is very televisual, and even I'm not sure if this was shot on film. It might have been digital. I know David Fincher is all digital, but if it is digital, they're executing it in a very good way that makes it look like a movie
Yeah,
and not just like a piece of content.
it, there is a good digital, right? Like, and you're right, Fincher's. I think it probably is.
Hmm.
It's not that sort of grainy type, but it's that nice high production value digital. And again, I
Hmm.
don't know, I might be wrong, but something like A Cure for Wellness,
Hmm.
in terms of its look, and that good kind of really sharp, no grainy look. And actually, A Cure for Wellness is probably in some parts got some similar feel to this as well.
Yeah, when you brought that up, I was gonna say it's sort of a similar, like it has that epic scope, but it's
Yep.
like a horror movie. I definitely that is a similar kind of thing, and even visually, it's sort of similar. But yeah, that would be an interesting double bill: A Cure for Wellness and The
Yeah,
Empty Man.
absolutely. Like,
Hmm.
let's get some money behind these movies. Let's start off with an unrelated, mostly scene in Bhutan. Let's do some
Yeah.
really cool things. Let's have a big bonfire, which then I think from memory he looks up and he sort of sees the stars getting warped, which made me think of the end of season 1 of True Detective when Matthew
Yeah.
McConaughey has a scene in
Mhm.
the den where he looks up, and actually True Detective is one of the things that I have similar feelings about, like the tone and just the shots of bridges, and there's just something about, I don't know what part of the states this is filmed in, but there's something quite eerie and sinister about some of these. I don't know, where are they? Are they sort of like Midwestern or
Yeah, this
um
one specifically be Midwest. It's like because I think they say specifically it said Missouri, which is
yeah,
interesting because I think Gone Girl, which is a Fincher movie,
yep,
was also set in Missouri. But Missouri specifically has that sort of like it has there's like soft like the Ozark Mountains
yep.
and that sort of like very like just lush like buried in the forest kind of vibe. But yeah, it's definitely Midwest. There's a lot of like kind of beat down areas and um, yeah, I can definitely see it. I forget where True Detective took place, but I think that would be more southern. But it's still like a similar vibe for sure.
I think it's just like you don't see cities much. There's just bridges over big, dark, deep rivers, and
Yeah.
sort of semi-rural and silos, and
Mhm.
and uh, uh, looking a little bit industrial. And it's just a sort of place where, like, a person could go missing very easily and
Yeah,
never
for
be
sure.
found, right? And
It's
even actually
interesting
there was, yeah,
because right behind me, like the place I live in now is very built up and it's a suburb of Houston. It's called League City. But about 30 years ago, it wasn't very developed at all. And I'm like living in a neighborhood. This neighborhood was probably built in 2007, but like there's this field behind me that in the 80s, the 70s and 80s was known as the Texas Killing Fields,
oh
and
well,
um, and a lot of people went missing in that field. Well, that didn't go missing in that field. People went missing, and then later their remains were found in this field, and it was linked to like some serial killer who was around here in the 70s and 80s.
some like Yellow King bastard.
Yeah, pretty much. And just like you said, like I mean, back then because there was nothing here really, and there was a town, but it was like farther away, and this part over here was not developed at all, and it was just the middle of nowhere basically. So it was a perfect place to just go and have someone disappear, I guess. But yeah, it's pretty creepy. But I could definitely see. There's actually a documentary about it on Netflix, the Texas Killing Fields. I could definitely see it being in like True Detective or something. There's also actually a movie. It's not a very good movie. I mean, I haven't seen all of it, but I've seen pieces of it called The Killing Fields, and it stars like Sam Worthington from Avatar
Yep.
fame. But yeah,
From
but
Clash
there's
of the
an
Titans fame.
yeah. Is he? Well, no, he's Australian. I was gonna ask if he was from New
Is
Zealand.
I think
Um,
the big trying to think who our big Kiwi stars are at the moment. I
mhm,
mean, probably just Tamira Morrison as Boba Fett.
yeah. Um, no, Russell Crowe is not. Is Russell Crowe from New Zealand?
Australian, I think. But I
Okay.
think I think it gets confusing because like a lot of people like hop between Australia and New Zealand. They're kind of like sort of like sister countries. So there's even like um sometimes arguments over whether something is belongs to New
Mhm.
Zealand or Australian. And I think there's things like the probably don't know if you know the bands Split Enz and Crowded House, but sort of bands where like a lot of the members like grew up in New Zealand and then sing quite a bit, name drop New Zealand locations, but then spent quite a bit of time in Australia as well. So there's often this whole, they're an Australian band, no, they're a New Zealand band.
Yeah,
Um, I think probably some of the actors may have done a bit of hopping between both.
yeah. I always feel weird. Like I don't mean to compare Kiwis to Australians because I know some people can be touchy about it.
No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of like brotherly joking, and I imagine it's the same with the states and Canada, where like it's a bit like, you can hassle your brother, right, because you're
Yeah.
family and you're allowed to do it. And it's like, I think Australians and Kiwis will make fun of each other because like they're so close. But then
Mhm.
it's like if it's coming from the outside, then they'd probably band together because culturally they're very similar.
Yeah.
And even the things they make fun of each other for are often quite similar as well. So like they like to make fun of how many sheep New Zealanders have and all sorts of um,
Yeah.
connections about what that means. Like sheep shaggers is sort of a common insult.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm partially joking, but like the only reason I say that is I had a friend who went on a cruise, and I think there was some like they had some workout class done that was like led by somebody who was from New Zealand, and somebody asked him if he was Australian, and he got very angry about that. It was like, I'm from New Zealand, and yeah, but I wasn't actually there to witness that, but I had a friend who told me that story. I think
Well,
I had a, or go ahead, sorry.
well, I was going to say, I think sometimes the Kiwi accent gets confused with South African,
Mm,
um, and it's hard. It's hard to be self-aware about your own accent. I've got no idea what this conversation will sound like with your Texan
yeah,
accent and my Southern Kiwi drawl. But I think Kiwis are known for kind of mumbling quite a bit and not pronunciating each word quite clearly. So there's probably some weird ones that I said in this conversation.
yeah, I feel like the Kiwi accent is like softer, like I don't know how to explain it, but like
Yeah.
more than like the other, than like not the other, but but then the Australian accent. Like I feel like the Australian accent is similar, but it's like a harsher, like more like twangy. I don't know how
Hey,
to.
hey, mate. Yeah, just kind of more exaggerated. Yeah. So
Yeah.
maybe New Zealand is a diluted one, but I think like with any countries, there's regional stuff within it, and like the people in Auckland in the north of New Zealand, might make fun of the way that people in the south of the Southland talk.
Mhm.
But I again, I don't really understand the Kiwi accent. I don't really hear any differences. There's the kind of more like Māori sort of pronunciations of English where I'm not gonna imitate it because that's probably not very politically correct. But there's this kind of like bro talk that people will do, and um, that's probably if I have to affect a Kiwi accent, I'll probably go more more into that, like what you might be hearing in something like the Hunt for the Wilder People, like
Mhm.
that style of talking. So I
Yeah,
I
for sure.
I I can hear that as Kiwi, and probably when I watch something like Flight of the Conchords, I start to hear it as well because they are
Mhm.
dealing with people with New York accents.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's interesting to compare like different English dialects because really, I mean, there's like people in England have an English accent, but then you have a bunch of different dialects just within America or within the United States. Like you have people from New York, and you have people on the West Coast, and then you have people from the South. So it's interesting how varied it gets.
Yeah, absolutely. And as outsiders, we can tell some of the broader ones. We can tell the difference between like a California accent and like a Boston one, right? And it's
Mhm.
sort of like watching the Bear at the moment on Disney Plus, and that
Yeah.
kind of Chicago talk. Like you can,
Mhm.
when you're hearing it, you can hear it. And if you've got like extreme examples, you can notice the difference. But probably we wouldn't have much of an ear for maybe more specific things where I don't know, does somebody from Missouri sound different than someone from Alabama? I'd have no idea.
Maybe a little bit, but I feel like they more kind of just fall into like a Southern kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um, the Canadian accent is interesting. I didn't think about it like that much when I first listened to Film Junk, but over time I can definitely recognize their Canadian accents.
I mean I can pick up when Jay's probably going to hassle Sean or Frank for an boot. Um,
Yeah.
but, but like growing up, like watching American movies, like a lot of the actors are Canadian, and like so many of the movies set in the states are filmed in Toronto, so it all gets very interchangeable, and you just get used to these images of these big, tall American buildings that are actually like skyscrapers in Toronto. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, for
so
sure.
quite confusing. But now I've got a good eye for. Yeah, I think this is filmed in Canada. I don't think this is the states.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of stuff filmed in Canada for sure. I know, like the Incredible Hulk was filmed on like a famous street in Toronto that like the Film Junk guys frequented. Like the big battle at the end of the movie is like on some like famous Toronto street, even though I'm pretty sure the scene is supposed to be in New York City within the movie. but they have Toronto doubling for New York.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
Toronto's played New York more times than New York's played New York.
Yeah, for sure.
It's cheaper, right? Is that pretty much it, or they've just got a
Yeah, I
good
think it's
local film?
cheaper. It just comes down to like tax breaks and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and they film in
easy to
Vancouver a
park.
lot. Yeah, and that's why they film a lot of stuff in Atlanta, because Atlanta is like a cheap place for them, for Hollywood to shoot stuff. And there's movie studios in Atlanta, and there's a whole like movie
Oh yeah,
industry there basically. Which is kind of crazy, but yeah, that's pretty.
That- and that's probably about like post Lord of the Rings, New Zealand, where you know Peter Jackson just sort of set up New Zealand to be a viable place to film movies, even if they aren't doing so to take advantage of New Zealand landscape and
Yeah,
just things like what its Way of Water
yeah. I
got
was gonna
all
say all the Avatar
made.
movies are made in New Zealand now.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So it's quite crazy how New Zealand has become like right at the front in terms of like filmmaking technology, when sort of 30 years ago that it would have just been a joke, right?
Yeah. What's interesting thing about where Peter Jackson came from, and that he was making these schlocky horror films, and by like the early 2000s, like he was developing into, like, I know like his Lord of the Rings movies were huge, obviously, but like he wasn't just becoming this big filmmaker. He was like developing technologies
Mm.
that were also like revolutionizing the industry, like all together. So just sort of like a James Cameron type. Like, I know James Cameron has moved to New Zealand. I think he just lives there, and then he makes
Yeah,
all his movies in New Zealand. But yeah, Peter Jackson has definitely had an interesting trajectory in his career.
yeah. We need to get them all over here. Get like repatriate Nolan to sort of get him over here, and maybe
Yeah,
Villeneuve.
yeah,
Who are the other big ones that we need to get over here?
yeah. I mean, those are some good ones. Um, they're directing the big sort of sci-fi movies and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think that was all my thoughts on Empty Man. Did you have any other thoughts on Empty Man?
No, that's it. That's it. I'm empty man on this particular topic. But
Yeah,
good to talk about if it builds awareness of a movie that I think people should check out, then
mhm.
great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for being here. I think it was fun to talk about for sure. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. And next
Yeah,
time, it's gonna be Morbius.
yes, yeah.
Got a lot
We
to say
wanted
on
to
that
review
movie.
Morbius. That could definitely be an interesting discussion. Yeah,
Awesome.
but
Thanks, Drew.
yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.